by a certain type of presentation. And this direct or attract certain types of immune cells. For example, the T helper cell, that is a signaling cell. This is a cell that contains a lot of chemical signaling. So cells communicate by chemical signals and by contact. So when these contacts occur, this T helper cell affect these T killer cells that can recognize this spike protein. And what happens is it becomes a lot of these T killer cells. It's divide. So you have a lot of T killer cells, and it stimulates, so it could actually kill this cell. It gives them a kiss of death, and the cell do suicide. And that actually causes a lot of tissue damage, because all these places these cells has been in your tissues will be wounds, small wounds all over. And that will start wound healing process. And that is both coagulation, coagulation, and you have small sort of clots, very micro clots from this one, for all the places where you have these wounds, and also the inflammation that is also part of the wound healing process. And if these clots become, clogged together, you can have really big clots. And then they could, be strokes and heart attacks and so on. Okay, and we talk about antibodies. Everybody's talking about the antibody response from these vaccines. But that's secondary. To cause antibody production, you have to cause a lot of tissue damage. And that is, I think, not so good, actually. And what happens here is when this cell dies, it collapses, let out its content, and there's another type of cell called the macrophage, and that is a cell that's eating everything that's outside, all the proteins, all the reminiscence of dead cell and so on. And it also breaks it down to pieces and present on the surface in another system. And this system is only for cells involved in the immune response. And that attracts another type of signaling cell, T helper cell, and B cell. And B cells are expressing antibodies. And they sit in the membrane of the cell. And when this cytokine stimuli, the B cell divides. You have a lot of B cells with this specific type of antibodies, and it will develop into antibody factories. So it's called plasma cell. But they will become a lot of antibody factories that will produce high levels of antibodies that are specific for the spike protein. But what I want to say is that this is secondary in this mechanism. Like protein vaccines go directly to this Th2 mechanism, so you don't have to have the harm of the killing, destroying the tissues. Okay, or I should say here, if you have a lot of high production of antibodies, there's another problem, is that you also produce different subtypes of antibodies. For example, IgE also. And that activates mast cell. And mast cell, everybody who has allergies know what mast cell is. It's a cell that contains small sort of bubbles filled with chemical signals, especially histamine, and that is giving us allergic symptoms. And for example, if IgE binds to these activated mast cells, for example, might be that the spike protein or parts of the spike protein or other what you are allergic to can bind and cross-bind these receptors, and a lot of histamine, high concentration of histamine, will be released in the tissue where this invading mast cell exists. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little about another problem with this high activation of vaccine mechanism. It's because immune system cannot fight different threats at the same time. You cannot stir the immune system in different directions at the same time. So all the immune cells will go to the place with the highest concentration of chemical signaling, which is the cytokines and so on. And if you inject something in your muscle, that will be an enormous threat. It's inside your body and it's produce a high level of spike protein, and that would be a heavy burden on the immune system. So other things like nerve viruses, like for example if you have herpes in your nerves, they can hide there. They will be activated because immune system will back off. So it's very common if you have a severe cold, you get a herpes outbreak. Also with vaccine, if you have a high stimulation of your immune system by vaccine, it also can happen. You can have herpes, different type of herpes virus infections, and that can of course give you nerve symptoms. Another thing is that if you are infected, for example, we noticed in Israel at the third booster, me and my husband, that people started to die a lot from COVID. And what is happening here in a lot of COVID deaths? And we saw actually, they started to give the third booster in a campaign a few days ago. And that actually led to that a lot of people died from COVID. That was very strange. So actually, it is, if you have an ongoing infection, you should never give a vaccine. So if you give a vaccine at the same time as you have an ongoing infection, for example, a virus in your mucus, then resources go to take care of the vaccine. And then this infection ongoing can be left alone for some days. And then you might have a bigger infection later on. When your immune system starts to react to that, you will have more severe infection symptoms. Another thing is the cancer. It's the same thing. Cancer cells are controlled by the same system as this vaccine. So if you put a lot of effort to take care of the vaccine effects, of course, if you have cancer cells in your body, they can start to grow and will not be controlled by your immune system. And if that's ongoing for a week or two, I mean, it could be too late. It could be a tumor and maybe change is occurring or whatever, I don't know. This might be one mechanism that could be a problem for people with cancer. There might be several, but this is one mechanism. I'm not giving all the solution, I'm just talking as my view as an immunologist. Okay? And there's also cells that are not attacked by the adaptive immune system. And they are, first of all, red blood cells that doesn't have a nucleus. These cells doesn't express any spike protein either, so it can be red blood cells, it can be platelets, and I don't know what happens, but if they get inside themselves mRNA, it will of course be some kind of stress, disturbance. I don't know what happens. I've read somewhere that people see strange behavior of red blood cells in the blood in vaccinated people, I don't know, that they clog together. I don't know if that is a fact. I asked the question to doctors and people who noticed that, if you can think of what could happen if you have a disturbed metabolism, disturbed stress in this type of cells. More severe, I think, is the immune privilege breakdown. And immune privilege is that there's certain areas that are not attacked by immune system. For example, reproductive cells, sperm cells, oocyte, should be protected from your immune system, because if you have an infection, these cells should not be eliminated, because then your life is, biologically, your life is not worth anything if you cannot reproduce and so on. And also immunological protection. The immune system, if your immune system is, the capacity is eliminated, you might be in very much danger. The same is with brains and the central nervous system. If the central nervous system get attacked, I mean, if you sort of kill your brain cells, then functions that you cannot breathe, you cannot work, you cannot think, it's very dangerous, and that would probably kill you. So these areas are protected not to be attacked by the immune system. So what happened if such cells get transfected and get mRNA, for example, because this is mainly the problem with the mRNA vaccines. Of course, they will express spike protein, and spike protein is designed to sit in the cell membrane, Normally, if you have a virus there, the spike protein will actually sit in the cell membrane like that, and on the outside of the cell, and then inside, on the inside of the cell, the virus particle is built. And that is from the structural proteins, the nucleocapsid, the envelope, and there's a matrix then sort of connecting the spike protein and the cell membrane with this inner structure. But with this vaccine, you don't have any inner structure. So what happens? We have a lot of spike proteins sitting in the membranes of this type of immune privileged cells. I don't know. How long will they sit there? Probably for a long time. Because this mRNA that is encoding this spike protein is very much more stable than normal mRNA. So that will probably have a long expression time. And it's also known that the expression level of the proteins that are produced are very high. The levels are very, very high in this cell. So, since there are different systems protecting this type of cells, can it be that antioxidant defense is lost because the burden of because it's often innate immune system that protects these cells. If that antioxidant defense is lost, would you induce a very strong oxidative stress? And this ROS system is actually metabolism from oxygen. And it will produce a lot of aggressive molecules like hydrogen peroxide. You will have very aggressive. They will actually damage both lipids, it will damage proteins, it will damage DNA. And that's good if you want to damage the pathogens. But that can also, if you have a very strong activation, it can also damage these cells that you are expressing these spike proteins. And of course, you will have a very severe induced inflammation if this is lost. So, I'm thinking, this is just suggestions, you know. I know inflammation is quite closely linked to prion diseases or amyloidosis. And I think might be that if, for example, if you have proteins and the protein are damaged because, you know, you break the binding, you change the structure of these proteins, of course they can change the structure and then you can create this kind of denaturated protein or changed protein that could actually block functions of your nerves or whatever. And that could, of course, lead to neurodegenerative diseases. And I also read somewhere, this is a question to all the doctors here, that if you have an oxidative stress, I read that it can affect the cardiac effects and the vessels, that it will be more permeable. Is it a reason for example, that you have sudden death in young people, that they have this kind of oxidative stress, heavy inflammation? I don't know. Infertility, it's known, for example, that spermatocytes, if there's an inflammation in the spermatocyte, it's a reason for becoming infertile. So if you have inflammation and oxidative stress or DNA damage, whatever, in these cells, will that lead to fertility? I think so, but I can't answer, I don't know, because this is just a suggestion. I want people here to react. Can you do something about this? I mean, this is a suggestion. I know the immunology, but I don't know the real effect. I can only guess. So anyway, I will summarize this complicated information. I know it's complicated. The pre-MV mechanism, it starts the Th1 mechanism, which actually killing damage in your tissues. And that actually causes a lot of tissue damage, which could be a problem depending on where does this tissue damage occur. It causes tissue scarring, for example, if you have a dead cell in the heart muscle, you will have scarring. And if you have a scarring in the wrong place, will this heart muscle react when you have the sinus signal? I mean, will it affect your rhythm? I don't know, I think so. But could happen that you have the muscle doesn't really respond to the signals. You will have coagulation, blood clotting in certain people. oxidative stress, inflammation, see there. Also, you have the antibody response also, but that's secondary. And with antibody response, the most common severe sort of side effect is actually autoimmune reactions. It's a lot of autoimmune reaction linked to this Th2 mechanism molecules. So that is it's also some that is also linked to the Th1, but most of them are linked to the antibody system. And you will have mast cell activation. You can have very high levels of histamine in some patients. And I also heard that people, maybe months after, have very much problem with histamine. They have allergic reaction that is very severe, long-going, intensive, and even antihistamine doesn't help them. So this is something, if your doctors listen to this, that you might think about, that maybe you have to give very high antihistamine treatments. I don't know, you have to ask. Think about that. And this oxidative stress inflammation, would it lead to infertility, prion diseases? Maybe. Of course, individual factors affect this system. Both, what kind of genetics do you have? How will it affect your... it's different because it's a very large individual factor here. And you have the immunological imbalance with maybe higher risk for infections directly after your injection. You will have higher risk for cancer development and probably growth of viruses in your nerve cells that they can hide because they are not killed, so nerves can stay there for a long virus can stay in nerve cells for a long time, like with herpes virus, like with HIV virus, and so on. And you can, of course, then from this have a nerve system if you have a lot of inflammation and so on associated to your nerves. Okay, so thank you.